A discreet, high-stakes conversation is underway behind closed doors in the Middle East, the kind of negotiation that can change the next phase of a conflict without a single public declaration. Over the last 48 hours, multiple international sources say Egyptian mediators propose that a group of Hamas fighters holed up in the vast Rafah tunnel network be allowed safe passage out of those tunnels in exchange for disarmament and precise tunnel coordinates so the subterranean complex can be destroyed. The offer, if true, is at once tactical and political. An olive branch from Cairo wrapped in a demand for intelligence. Narrators said, "Let them leave alive, and in return, we will help get the exact tunnel maps so those tunnels can be destroyed forever." That sentence, preserved exactly as it appeared in the original account, captures the kernel of the store proposal now being circulated by mediators and reported by multiple outlets. At its heart, Egypt's calculation that preventing a new wave of fighters from emerging on its border is worth offering Israel useful intelligence on how to disable an underground threat that has cost many lives on both sides. Who is pushing what and why matters. The mediators reportedly include Egyptian and US officials working to persuade Israel to accept a deal that would remove fighters from a tunnel network near Rafah, some of which, according to the reporting, extends beneath territory currently held by Israeli forces. That geographic fact is politically explosive, allowing armed men to exit tunnels that cross the so-called yellow line or Israeli-held ground would be framed by many Israelis as conceding ground to militants and rewarding armed action. Reuters, citing security sources, described a specific Egyptian proposal that fighters surrender arms to Egypt and hand over tunnel information in return for safe passage. President Donald J. Trump, now serving as President of the United States, has been cast in some accounts as a diplomatic driver behind an effort to show he can engineer a political way out of continuing violence. The public record confirms President Trump returned to the White House in January 2025. His administration has signaled interest in stabilization arrangements and multinational frameworks for Gaza, even as the core combatants remain entrenched. Reporting on these negotiations specifically says US and Egyptian mediators have pressed to create conditions for fighters to surrender or depart in a way that reduces violence. That larger context, US engagement, Egyptian mediation, Israeli skepticism is essential to understanding the deal on the table. Narrator said this is basically a spy-style deal. The shorthand is blunt but clarifying. The arrangement reads like an intelligence trade, information for lives. Egypt would obtain exact tunnel maps, the kind of detailed technical knowledge that takes months or years to gather from surveillance, recon, human intelligence, and tunnel captures. Israel, in exchange for allowing fighters to leave, would gain the tactical means to deny those tunnels as a platform for future attacks. For a state that has made destroying tunnel infrastructure a stated objective, the promise of precise coordinates is militarily tempting. Reuters and other wires reported the same core proposal, safe passage coupled with handover of tunnel details. But Israel's publicly expressed position is a hard line. Senior Israeli officials speaking through official channels and press statements over the past months have insisted that militants who carried out attacks must be killed or captured, that any conditional release would be seen as a political defeat and would invite future operations. Israeli leaders argue that allowing even a small number of Hamas fighters to walk away unscathed would be used by Hamas as propaganda and could encourage more violence. That political calculus, the fear of a narrative victory for Hamas, is one reason the proposal faces stiff resistance in Jerusalem. Reuters reporting on mediator conversations made clear Israel had not accepted the proposals at the time of reporting. Here is the dilemma in human terms. A small number of combatants reporting cites estimates of roughly 100-200 fighters still believed to be trapped in an extensive tunnel system near Rafah could either be allowed to exit under tight supervision, potentially sparking political anger and accusations of leniency, or be denied exit and face battlefield methods of neutralization that carry near certain risk of death underground. That stark either-or frames the debate in Cairo, Washington, and Jerusalem. Multiple outlets who have spoken with security officials and mediators use similar estimates for the number of fighters still thought to be entombed in those tunnels. The figure varies by source and is unverified, but the consensus is that it is not a large force in numerical terms, though their location in hardened subterranean complexes makes offensive operations complex and costly. The operational choices Israel might make if it refuses a negotiated exit are brutal and technically difficult. Military analysts have long warned that collapsing tunnels, whether by specialized bunker buster munitions, high-pressure flooding, or engineered collapse, almost always results in death for anyone inside. Those tactics can be logistically feasible, but are morally and politically fraught because they amount to a methodical way to annihilate anyone trapped below. The original transcript argued that collapse or flooding were possible outcomes. Contemporary reporting focuses more on the diplomatic push and the intelligence exchange, while observers continue to warn that military solutions carry catastrophic humanitarian consequences. Given the reports that mediators offered tunnel coordinates in return for safe passage, the prospect of either side choosing a military finish versus a negotiated political outcome is very much alive. For Egypt, the calculation is national self-interest above sympathy for an armed group. Cairo's core concern, repeatedly stated in diplomatic parlance and visible in its public posture, is border stability. Egyptian officials fear that a sudden displacement of fighters or an uncontrolled wave of militants moving onto or through Sinai would destabilize Egyptian border towns, incite violence inside Sinai, and complicate security cooperation with Israel and the United States. In this sense, Egypt's push is defensive. Keep the conflict off Egyptian soil and secure the means to neutralize an underground threat without creating fresh chaos. That same logic explains Cairo's role as a broker in other Gaza negotiations, where it has historically tried to balance pressure from Gulf states, Qatar, and regional public opinion with its own security needs. Contemporary reporting confirms. Egyptian mediation efforts and the offer described above, the political optics are painful for Israel. Allowing any Hamas fighters to leave alive would be seized upon by Hamas as a sign of resilience. It would be framed domestically as a concession and internationally as a precedent. Israeli political leaders who have survived repeated crises and manage a war cabinet and a fractious political coalition must weigh not only the tactical merits of the intelligence they might gain, but the domestic political consequences of any deal. That aversion to perceived weakness is why many Israeli officials have publicly rejected the idea. Aviation and security analysts note that in wartime, decisions often turn on both immediate force protection concerns and on how decisions will play in political and media narratives at home. Reuters coverage made clear Israel had not agreed to the Egyptian proposal as of reporting. Narrator said he wants to show the world that only he can end this war. That line, preserved from the original narration, attempts to explain the US role as more than mediator, a presidency seeking a diplomatic achievement. Whether President Trump's office sees this specific arrangement as a signature foreign policy success is a matter of internal White House strategy and public messaging. The White House has signaled interest in stabilization forces and international arrangements for Gaza in recent months. The Reuters reporting and other outlets indicate US officials are actively engaged in mediating proposals to reduce frontline violence, but even active US engagement cannot impose a deal on Israel if Jerusalem refuses diplomacy, still requires consent from the party asked to act. The human stakes are immediate for families in Gaza and Israel. The prospect of a negotiated withdrawal of fighters or of devastating underground collapses is not an abstract policy choice, but a matter of life and death. Those who live near Rafah have already endured repeated bombardments, displacement, and a collapsing humanitarian environment. For Egyptian border towns, the risk is new waves of refugees or armed men moving across borders. For international mediators, the question is whether a narrow tactical exchange, arms and tunnel maps for safe passage might become the seed of a larger stabilization plan or whether it will harden positions and lead to an even bloodier clearing operation underground. Reuters and Al Jazeera coverage both emphasize the urgent, contested nature of the talks and the high level of diplomatic energy behind them. What would a safe passage look like in practice? Mediators have reportedly discussed arrangements, including the surrender of arms to Egyptian custody, verification of tunnel coordinates, and strict conditions on the movement of any fighters leaving underground. The mechanics would require neutral monitors, secure custody arrangements, and guarantees, all of which are difficult to implement in the fog of war. Past prisoner exchange and ceasefire arrangements have shown that verification mechanisms are fragile when trust is low. Any agreement would also have to be constructed so it could not be easily exploited for propaganda by either side, a near impossible task when each side is trying to secure domestic rhetorical advantages. The wires make clear these are precisely the obstacles that have slowed any immediate breakthrough. The proposal's legal and moral complexity cannot be overstated. International humanitarian law and the laws of armed conflict require combatants to be treated according to certain rules, but they also prohibit collective punishment and place strict limits on tactics that would knowingly kill civilians. Collapsing a tunnel complex, which may contain fighters but could also be adjacent to civilian shelters, raises legally fraught questions about proportionality and distinction. The public debate in Israel would likely turn on both legality and morality. Egyptian diplomats framing the deal as a way to prevent wider regional destabilization present it as a lesser evil compared with indefinite subterranean warfare. Observers stress that even if the intelligence trade is real, implementing it in a way that meets legal standards, preserves lives, and holds political legitimacy would be a staggering diplomatic and operational achievement. On the ground, political signals will matter as much as military ones. If Israel signs off, even reluctantly, it would be a politically costly move domestically, but one that could open a path for a phased ceasefire or prisoner deals. If Israel rejects it, the immediate result is likely to be a continuation of kinetic operations against tunnel networks, a choice that could produce mass casualties inside underground complexes and further inflame regional tensions. Either path has consequences beyond the battlefield. For Egypt, a political outcome that relieves pressure on Sinai and reduces refugee flows is preferable. For the United States, a diplomatic success would bolster claims of global leverage. For Israel, any concession must be weighed against national security imperatives and public sentiment calling for decisive victory. Reuters reporting notes both the potential diplomatic payoff and Israel's resistance to the underlying proposal. Finally, any attempt to sell this kind of arrangement to domestic and international audiences will have to contend with competing narratives. Supporters will say surrendering a handful of combatants in exchange for disabling a nationwide tunnel system saves lives and weakens Hamas's long-term operational capacity. Critics will call it a capitulation that rewards violence. For neutral mediators, the immediate task is to find technical safeguards and verification that make a politically palatable deal feasible. For the rest of the world, the episode is a reminder that wars are rarely decided only in open battlefields. They are also decided in intelligence rooms, back channels, and quiet compromises that rarely make the front page until the terms are public. Al Jazeera and Reuters reporting from the last day show mediators trying to thread the needle, but for now, the offer is still on the table and Israel has not accepted it. The clock is ticking. The Rafah tunnels are physically finite and politically volatile. Any negotiated extraction, intelligence handover, or military clearance will shape not just the next tactical moves in Gaza, but the broader diplomatic architecture around the conflict. If the current leaking proposal succeeds, it would represent a rare moment where intelligence and restraint buy a safer border and the prospect of reduced immediate violence. If it fails, the alternatives are an intensification of underground warfare or a carefully executed operation with grim human costs. In either scenario, the decision reflects more than military strategy. It reflects what each actor is willing to accept politically and morally in pursuit of what they call victory.